November 2, 1944. 3:47 p.m. somewhere over Czechoslovakia. Lieutenant Bruce Carr glanced down at the engine instruments and immediately understood the problem. The oil pressure needle was dropping fast. Seconds later, thick black smoke poured from the nose of his P-51 Mustang, and the Merlin engine began to scream in a way no pilot ever forgot. Metal grinding against metal. The sound of an engine destroying itself. 30 seconds earlier, Carr had been leading a low-level strafing run against a German airfield. Now an 88mm flak fragment had punched through the engine compartment and severed the oil line. Without oil, the Merlin would seize in less than 90 seconds. When it did, the propeller would lock solid, turning the Mustang into a 7-ton glider with the aerodynamics of a brick. There was no decision to debate. Carr slid the canopy back, rolled the crippled aircraft inverted, and dropped into the freezing air. At 8,000 feet, the parachute deployed. The Mustang vanished below him, trailing smoke toward the forest. Carr hung beneath the canopy, drifting slowly, watching enemy territory stretch in every direction. He was deep behind German lines, more than 200 miles from Allied airfields. He checked himself as he descended. No radio, no survival kit. 1.45 caliber pistol with 7 rounds. No food, no water. November temperatures. Snow at night. The statistics were brutal. Allied pilots shot down over occupied territory had roughly a 23% chance of evading capture and returning to friendly lines. The remaining 77% ended the war in prison camps or in unmarked graves. Carr hit the ground hard. His ankle twisted on impact, sending pain up his leg. Not broken, but damaged. He gathered the parachute quickly, dragged it into the trees, and buried it under leaves and mud. German patrols would be searching soon. They always searched. Bruce Ward Carr had been born on January 28, 1924, in Union Springs, New York. There was nothing exceptional about his childhood except one detail that mattered more than anything else. At 15, in 1939, he learned to fly. Not through a military program. Not through a school. A local crop duster named Earl let the teenager take the controls of a biplane one afternoon. Carr learned quickly. By 16, he had logged more flight hours than most Army Air Forces cadets would accumulate before graduation. In September 1942, Carr enlisted in the Army Air Forces. At training, fate intervened again. His instructor turned out to be the same man who had taught him to fly years earlier. Earl reviewed Carr's application, saw 240 logged flight hours, and recommended him for accelerated training. By August 1943, Carr was a flight officer. By February 1944, he was in England, assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, one of the first American units to fly the P-51 Mustang in combat. The Mustang changed the war. With its long range, speed, and firepower, it allowed American fighters to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. German pilots called them the long-nosed bastards. Loss rates for Allied bombers dropped. The Luftwaffe began losing experienced pilots faster than they could be replaced. Carr loved the aircraft immediately. The cockpit fit him. The controls were intuitive. The power was intoxicating. He named his Mustang Angel's Playmate. He also flew differently from other pilots. On March 8, 1944, Carr chased a Bf-109 down to treetop level at more than 400 miles per hour. When the German pilot tried to pull up, he stalled and crashed. Carr returned expecting praise. Instead, his commander reprimanded him for reckless flying. The kill did not count. Carr didn't argue. He never did. He simply kept flying. By summer 1944, he was scoring confirmed victories. By September, he had earned the Silver Star for shooting down 3 German fighters in minutes, then escorting a damaged wingman all the way home instead of pursuing more kills. By October 29th, he had 5 confirmed victories and was officially an ace. Then, for days later, he was alone on the ground in enemy territory. As daylight faded on November 2nd, Carr made his first critical decision. Instead of moving south or west toward Allied lines, the direction the Germans would expect, he headed north, deeper into enemy territory. The logic was simple. The Germans would search outward from his landing site, assuming he was fleeing. They would not expect him to move toward their own bases. He needed supplies, food, water, information. The nearest German airfield lay roughly 5 miles north. For 2 days, Carr moved at night, hiding during daylight hours. His ankle throbbed constantly. He drank from streams. He lay motionless in ditches while patrols passed within yards. By the 3rd day, hunger became unbearable. He was burning thousands of calories just to stay warm. His body had nothing left to give. On the 4th afternoon, Carr reached the edge of the airfield. From a tree line overlooking the perimeter, he studied the base through binoculars taken from an abandoned shed. He planned to surrender the next morning. Captured airmen were generally treated better than infantry prisoners. Stalag Luft camps were survivable. Then, as darkness fell, he noticed something unexpected. 80 yards from his position, inside a revetment partially concealed by camouflage netting, sat a Focke-Wulf FW-190. 2 German mechanics worked beneath portable lights. Carr watched them carefully. They checked the fuel full. They ran up the engine. The deep, unmistakable roar of the BMW-801 radial filled the night air. They shut it down, covered the cockpit, and walked away. The aircraft was ready to fly. Carr stared at it for a long time. The plan to surrender evaporated. Somewhere between hunger, exhaustion, and instinct, Bruce Carr saw not a dead end, but a possibility. And possibilities had always been enough for him. Carr waited until 3 o'clock hours. The airfield had settled into silence. A skeleton night crew remained near the main hangars, but the revetment was unattended. No patrols passed nearby. No vehicles moved. Only the faint hum of generators and the distant crackle of a stove somewhere on the base. 80 yards separated Carr from the aircraft. There was no cover. If anyone looked in his direction, he would be shot on sight. He moved anyway. Carr crossed the open ground in less than a minute, staying low, forcing his injured ankle to cooperate through raw pain. He reached the revetment and pressed himself against the fuselage of the aircraft, breathing hard, listening. Nothing. No alarms. No shouts. Up close, the FW-190 was larger than he had imagined. Broad wings. Thick fuselage. A solid, purposeful machine. The cockpit sat high, protected by thick armored glass. This was not a delicate interceptor. It was a brute. Carr climbed onto the wing. The canopy was unlocked. He slid it back and dropped into the cockpit. Immediately, 2 problems became obvious. First, he could not read a single label. Every gauge, every switch, every placard was marked in German, printed in angular Gothic script. Nothing looked familiar by name. Second, the cockpit was cramped. Smaller than AP-51. His knees pressed close to the instrument panel. The layout was dense, intimidating, unfamiliar. But some things were universal. The control stick fell naturally into his right hand. Rudder pedals were where they always were. The throttle sat on the left. Physics did not change because the language was different. Carr checked his watch. Less than 4 hours until sunrise. He used every minute. He worked methodically, tracing systems with his hands. Gauges revealed themselves by position and behavior rather than labels. Airspeed sat where airspeed always sat. Altimeter where it always lived. Engine instruments clustered together. He located the fuel selector, the magneto switches, the propeller pitch control. The critical question remained: how to start the engine. On the right side of the cockpit, he found a T-shaped handle with German lettering. One word looked familiar enough to guess its purpose. He pushed it. Nothing. He pulled it. Still nothing. Then he heard it. A mechanical whine. The inertia starter. Carr let it spin, counting seconds. 10, 15, 20. The pitch rose. When it sounded right, he pulled the handle again. The BMW 801 exploded to life. The sound was overwhelming. 14 cylinders of air-cooled power roaring in the night. The noise echoed across the airfield. Someone would hear it. Carr shoved the throttle forward. The FW-190 began rolling immediately. The tail lifted almost at once. The aircraft felt eager, nose-heavy, powerful, responsive. He aimed between 2 hangars as figures emerged, shouting, pointing, running. 60 miles per hour. 70. At 90, Carr pulled back. The FW-190 leapt into the air, clearing the hangar roofs by a margin that felt far too small. He was airborne, alone, in a stolen German fighter. Now he had to survive. Carr climbed briefly, then forced himself back down. At altitude, German radar would track him instantly. Anti-aircraft batteries would have time to react. Fighters could intercept. At treetop level, he was harder to see, harder to track, harder to hit. He leveled out at 50 feet and pushed the throttle forward. The forest became a green blur beneath his wings. He identified the landing gear lever by feel and pulled it. A solid mechanical thunk confirmed success. The aircraft accelerated. He found the compass and oriented west-southwest, toward France. For 45 minutes, Carr flew low and fast, skimming fields, forests, and rivers. The sun rose behind him, painting the horizon in pale light. Fuel gauges showed full tanks. The FW-190 had enough range to make it, if nothing went wrong. Then he crossed the front lines, and everything opened fire. Allied anti-aircraft gunners saw exactly what they expected to see: a German fighter flying low and fast toward their positions. Tracers filled the air. Rifle fire crackled from the ground. Every gun that could bear on him did. Carr had no radio, no identification signal. German crosses still marked the wings. He dropped lower, 20 feet above the ground. Hedgehopping. The propeller washed toward dust and debris from roads. Civilians dove into ditches. American soldiers fired as he screamed overhead. Bullets struck the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered, but it held together. Ahead, Carr recognized the shape of the airfield. Home. As he lined up for landing, one final problem revealed itself. The landing gear would not come down. Carr pulled the lever. Nothing. Pumped it again. Still nothing. He searched frantically for an emergency system, unaware that the FW-190's hydraulics required a selector valve he had never identified. Below him, Allied gunners were preparing heavier weapons. There was no time left. Carr committed. He lined up beside the runway, lowered the flaps, one system he had successfully identified, and cut power. The FW-190 struck the grass at nearly 90 miles per hour. Metal screamed. Mud and debris erupted behind him. The aircraft slid hundreds of yards before grinding to a halt. Carr was alive. Rifles surrounded the aircraft within seconds. Military police shouted orders, expecting a German pilot. The canopy slid back. A mud-covered American climbed onto the wing. "I'm Captain Carr," he said, "of this squadron." No one believed him, until his commanding officer arrived and stared at the impossible sight: a missing pilot, presumed captured or dead, standing beside a wrecked German fighter on an American airfield. The story spread fast. The war was not finished with Bruce Carr. Not even close. 5 months later, April 2nd, 1945, Bruce Carr was back in a Mustang. The war had moved east. Germany was collapsing, but the Luftwaffe was still dangerous in pockets, short on fuel, short on experienced pilots, but not yet finished. Carr was now a first lieutenant, leading a 4-ship flight of P-51s on a reconnaissance mission near Schweinfurt. They were cruising at 15,000 feet when Carr saw movement above them. At first it looked like cloud shadow. Then it resolved into aircraft. Dozens of them. Carr counted quickly, then counted again. 60, possibly more. A stacked formation from 18,000 to 25,000 feet. Bf-109s and FW-190s, including late war variants. G-10s, D-9s. Fast, heavily armed, flown by whatever experienced pilots Germany still had left. Carr had 4 Mustangs. Standard doctrine was unambiguous. Disengage. Descend. Call it in. Let larger formations deal with it. No American manual ever written suggested attacking a force 15 times your size with no altitude advantage. Carr keyed his radio. Engaging. There was no hesitation from his wingmen. They climbed. The German formation did not react immediately. The attack made no sense. For fighters ascending directly into their midst violated every expectation. Carr used the moment. He slipped behind a Bf-109, closed the distance, fired a short burst. The German aircraft disintegrated. Carr rolled, shifted targets, fired again. An FW-190 took hits, rolled inverted, and fell away. The formation began to fragment, not in panic, but in confusion. Pilots did not know how many Americans were attacking or from where. Carr stayed in motion. Fire. Break. Climb. Fire again. Third kill. Fourth. Fifth. In less than 3 minutes, Carr destroyed 5 enemy aircraft. His wingmen accounted for 10 more. 15 German fighters went down. No American losses. When ammunition ran low, Carr led what remained of his flight back west. The surviving German pilots scattered, disengaging individually. The sky emptied as suddenly as it had filled. A week later, Carr was promoted to captain. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation was precise and restrained, written in the language of military formality. It noted his disregard for personal safety, the overwhelming numerical disadvantage, and the destruction of 5 enemy aircraft in a single engagement. He was 21 years old. By war's end, Carr had flown 172 combat missions and accumulated 14 to 15 confirmed aerial victories, depending on the accounting method. Records varied. The war was ending too fast for perfect bookkeeping. But Carr was not finished flying. He stayed in uniform. After World War II, he joined the Acrojets, America's first jet aerobatic demonstration team, flying the F-80 Shooting Star. In Korea, he flew 57 combat missions in the F-86 Sabre, eventually commanding the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. Then came Vietnam. Now a colonel, Carr flew 286 combat missions in the F-100 Super Sabre, low-level strikes, close air support, dangerous work over hostile terrain. 3 wars. 3 generations of aircraft. More than 500 combat missions in total. He retired in 1973. On April 25, 1998, Bruce Ward Carr died in St. Cloud, Florida, at the age of 74. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, among soldiers from every American conflict since the Revolution. His headstone listed his rank, his decorations, and the wars he fought. It did not mention the FW-190. It did not mention the 4 days alone behind enemy lines. It did not mention the belly landing under American gunfire. Some stories do not fit on stone. There are 2 ways to tell the story of Bruce Carr. One is the legend, the downed pilot who stole a German fighter from an active airfield and flew it home while both sides tried to kill him. The other is the record, the ace, the squadron commander, the Distinguished Service Cross recipient who led 4 aircraft against 60 and survived. Both are true, but the core of the story is simpler. When Bruce Carr ran out of fuel, altitude, ammunition, or acceptable options, he did not stop. He did not default to what was safe or expected. He looked at unfamiliar systems, impossible odds, and overwhelming risk and asked a different question. Not what should I do, but what else is possible? That question carried him through a Czechoslovakian forest, into a German cockpit, through a storm of friendly fire, and later, into the heart of the largest enemy fighter formation he would ever face. It carried him through 3 wars. And when he flew one last time in 1997, at the age of 73, rolling a Mustang low over a Florida airfield, a reporter asked him what he was thinking. Carr shrugged. What the airplane can do, he said. And what I can do. That was always enough.